a single fan, legally barred from earning a cent on it, built a Star Wars film the audience treated as more essential than most of what the studio itself released. And that contradiction is why this one project could change Star Wars for good. The proof is a number climbing into the millions, a number that by rule earns its maker nothing. The reasons stack up quickly, and together they point somewhere the people who own Star Wars would rather they didn't. In the days after it went live, fans stopped doing the thing they usually do with a fan film. They stopped grading it on a curve and started setting it beside the studio's own releases to argue which one held up better. The film is called Echoes of the Jedi, and the argument around it was never really about whether it was impressive for a passion project. It was about which version of Star Wars felt more alive, the one made by a fan or the one made by the company that owns the galaxy. That comparison, more than any dollar figure, became the story. The whole thing was built outside any studio system, without a marketing department or a release calendar, and yet it drew the kind of scrutiny normally reserved for a wide theatrical release. The question had shifted from whether it was good for a fan film to whether it was simply good, and the answer coming back was that it beat most of what the official machine had put out in years. Its maker had also proven the audience was waiting. His first Vader film had passed 30 million views on its own, a number most streaming shows would envy. So when the sequel arrived, the demand was never in question. The only question was how it measured up against the real thing, and the crowd made its call fast. Within a day, the clips were everywhere, the reaction videos were stacking up, and the same phrase kept surfacing in the comments, that this was what Star Wars was supposed to feel like. For years, one rule had held without anyone bothering to test it. Star Wars that looked and moved like this could only come from inside the company, and everything else was tribute, judged kindly, and forgotten fast. Part of why this one landed differently is that its maker had spent years chasing a look that could stand beside cinema, a stylized look built to hold up shot for shot against a studio production. So it did not read as amateur, it got held to the same bar as an official film, and it did not fold under the weight. The budget mattered far less than the fact that a studio was no longer required to reach the bar the studio itself had set. Once an audience starts holding an independent film to that standard and finding that it holds, the gate that was supposed to separate official Star Wars from everything else stops looking locked. It starts looking optional. A single fan, working with no permission to profit and no corporate safety net, had earned a seat at a conversation normally reserved for productions backed by billions. The studio kept every ticket sale and subscriber, yet the exchange still costed the assumption underneath everything. The quiet certainty that its logo was what made a Star Wars story count. Nothing from the outside had ever been good enough to put that certainty to the test. Now something was. That shift is small on its face and enormous underneath. But scope alone does not earn that comparison. Something in the film had to be good enough to force it, and it came down to a version of Vader the studio keeps flinching away from. The single scariest image of Vader the studio ever made almost never existed. It was the last thing they filmed, added late on a hunch. That image is the corridor sequence at the end of the Canon film Rogue One, the one that made a whole generation lean back on their seats. It was a near final edition, one of the last things shot for the entire production, pitched after the fact rather than planned as the centerpiece. The definitive modern Vader, the version everyone points to when they want to explain why he's frightening, exists only because someone squeezed it in at the very end. And even then, the studio kept it brief, a short burst of the fearsome figure and nothing more, over almost as soon as it began. Years after that hallway, the company tried to go further with the character, and then pulled itself back. In the Canon series Obi-Wan Kenobi, when the Dark Lord took a leading role, the team deliberately held back his full reveal, keeping even his own theme out of the score until the final hour, rather than leaning on him from the start. Twice now, the studio had reached for a truly fearsome Vader, and twice, it had either stumbled into the moment late or reined the moment in. The hesitation is not about ability. The company can plainly make the image when it wants to. It is a choice, made again and again, to hold him at a safe distance. The fan film made the opposite choice. It built a cornered, patient, unrelenting Vader into the spine of the entire story, and never once softened him. Because the film was animated, it could stage the Dark Lord with a scale and a stillness that a live shoot rarely risks, a camera free to go anywhere and hold on him as long as the moment needed, with no actor to protect and no set to light. Where the official productions trim, this one committed, and it committed from the first frame to the last. One reading is that the studio is quietly wary of its own villain, unsure how much menace the brand can safely carry. The films and the shows point the same way, even as the reason behind the caution stays unspoken. Even inside the company, creators have hinted that the tolerance for a harder edge shifts from project to project, loosened here, clamped down there. What is not in doubt is the gap that it left, a space the studio kept circling and rarely entered, and a fan walked straight into it and stayed. So a fan committed to the Vader the studio keeps trimming. If you want more breakdowns like this one, a quick subscribe keeps you first in line. The next question is whether anyone actually wanted that version, and the answer showed up within a day. The story opens within walking distance of a tomb, the resting place of the wife he lost, only months after the fall that remade him. That timing is the choice everything else grows from. The official stories have shown Vader newly born on the operating table and Vader fully formed decades later. But the man in between, still learning to be the weapon, it has never once stopped to visit. This film lives in that narrow window. He moves through it confident in the armor now, without hesitation, carrying himself like the machine the Emperor built. And yet he still holds the exact weaknesses the man once had, the anger and the grief that never fully cooled, close enough to the surface that the right words can still reach them. The tomb makes the point sharper. In both the canon stories and the older Legends continuity, Vader's visit to that resting place is placed decades later, long after the wound is scarred over and the man beneath the mask has gone quiet. This film walks him there while it is still open. It lets a returning enemy from his past name his old failings to his face in the middle of the fight, throwing his dead wife and his lost mother at him as weapons. And the figure who answers is not the hollow shape of later years. He's a man who can still be wounded by a sentence, still becoming the thing he will one day be. A version of the character 20 years on would shrug that off. This one cannot, and the film knows it. That is a stretch of the story the official productions have simply skipped, an emotional frame most Vader tales never bother to build. The company had the same window available for years and stepped past it every time. A fan planted a flag in it instead. Because the timing changes what a fight can mean, the choice pays off. When the finished later Vader takes the field, there is little to reach for beneath the armor, so a duel becomes a matter of who is stronger. Here, the armor is newer than the grief inside it, and every taunt lands on something still alive. The confrontation turns into the portrait of a man who is not yet finished burying who he was. That is the register the official stories reserve for their quietest scenes, and the film spends it on its loudest one. It is also the kind of risk a studio tends to avoid, because it asks the audience to feel sympathy for the figure it has spent decades teaching them to dread. A fan took that risk without a committee to talk him out of it, and the crowd rewarded exactly the risk the company will not take. Both the official films and the older Legends tales wait decades to bring him to that grave. The fan film brought him there while the ash was still warm. No official story had filmed that chapter, and none had risked that nerve. If that were only one critic's opinion, it would not matter much. But the audience answered, and the number would not stop climbing. 1,000 people did not stream a free film from their couches. They drove across the country, and some of them slept on a sidewalk to be first through the door. The premiere drew more than 1,000 fans to a single theater, some camping out from 4 in the morning for a screening that cost them nothing and earns its maker nothing. The creator later pointed to those early morning queues as proof of how much belief the project had gathered, and of how much the saga that started it all still means to the people who grew up on it. Figures from the official Star Wars productions were billed to appear alongside him. It played less like an upload and more like an event. Online, the response ran heavily positive across fan channels and reaction videos, the kind of praise usually saved for a wide theatrical release. No professional critics reviewed it, so this was the audience speaking entirely for itself, and the audience was generous, in a way it rarely is anymore for the official films. Even the first Vader film, years earlier, had pulled real notice, described in the press as impressive and unusually polished for something made outside the system. The sequel raised that ceiling. That reaction became its own small economy, because the creator openly encouraged fans to react to the film and to earn from their own reaction videos. A whole ecosystem of reviews and watch-alongs formed around it. People built audiences of their own on the back of it, dissecting the fight, the tomb, the choices, frame by frame. A work that generates that much secondary content becomes a center of gravity, and it pulled a corner of the internet into its orbit for weeks. What makes that demand so hard to dismiss is that it is clean. A studio release arrives pushed by a marketing budget, wrapped in trailers and interviews and paid placement. So its opening numbers always carry an asterisk about how much of the interest was bought. This film had none of that. There was nothing to inflate the count, no campaign to credit, no reason to show up except the work itself. Every view was a person choosing it on purpose, and every reaction video was someone betting their own audience that the choice would land. That is the rarest kind of signal a story can send, demand with nothing attached to it, and it pointed somewhere the studio did not choose. Beside the studio's reach, of course, it is still small. A single official teaser can pull tens of millions of views in a day. One trailer once drew 88 million views in 24 hours, another well over 100 million. A few million views on a fan film gathered over weeks does not touch that math, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. There is no box office here, no press tour, no billboards in every city, and that gap is exactly why the thing it did should trouble the people who own the reach. Because the appetite it fed was already there, waiting, and it fed that appetite with a fraction of the studio's resources. Reporting on fan sentiment has pointed the same direction for years, with one widely cited poll placing the original trilogy first for roughly 8 in 10 fans, and the older films still drawing crowds the newest ones struggled to match. A large part of the audience had been hungry for a certain kind of Star Wars, one the official slate kept not quite delivering, and a fan fed them before the studio did. Enthusiasm is one thing, consequences are another, and fans have forced this exact studio to change its mind before more than once. When the company erased decades of stories overnight, fans did not just complain. They bought the books, kept the hashtags running, and pushed until the best of it came back. In 2014, the vast library of Star Wars novels, comics, and games that fans had followed for a generation was declared no longer canon and rebranded under a new name. The backlash was immediate and organized, and the company did not simply let the old material disappear. Those stories stayed in print under the Legends banner, and years later a dedicated reprint line was still bringing dozens of old titles back into stores. More than that, the new canon quietly began mining the very material it had set aside, pulling a fan-favorite Imperial strategist and the Witches of Dathomir out of the old books and back onto the screen. The demand never died, and because it never died, the material came back. The pattern held with a cancelled cartoon and with this very creator. When the canon series The Clone Wars was wound down, a fan campaign ran for years, and the studio not only revived it, but took the fans' own rallying cry, the hashtag they had used to demand the show back, and turned it into its own promotion. And in 2019, an outside music company tried to claim this creator's very first Vader film as Disney's own property outright, not just the score, but the entire work. And Disney had initially refused to reverse it, even when the creator asked directly. Only when fans pushed did the claim get stripped and the film handed back. 3 times over, fans made the company reverse itself. None of this is new territory for fan films either. Decades ago, a short parody film became so admired that one of the writers behind it was eventually hired into official Star Wars animation. And for years, the company ran its own sanctioned fan film contest with a top prize chosen by the saga's own creator, even as it kept true in-universe drama outside the approved lane. But that is the version where fans win. At another franchise, a fan film this ambitious ran headfirst into the opposite outcome. A fan film once grew so large that a studio took it to court and then quietly rewrote the rules for everyone who came after it. The film was a Star Trek project called Axanar, and it did what fan films were never supposed to do. It set out to make a full feature-length film instead of a short. It raised more than $1 million across its campaigns, with a single push bringing in over $600,000 from thousands of backers. And it poured the money into a real operation, a leased studio space, a professional crew, and a cast with genuine industry credits. Its finished proof of concept short looked broadcast ready, and that was the problem. The companies that own Star Trek watched a fan project start to resemble a competitor, and in late 2015, they sued the people behind it, listing a long catalog of infringed elements down to the constructed Klingon language. Then, with the case underway, they did something bigger than winning it. They issued a strict new rulebook for every fan project, not just this one, capping any single film at 2 segments of no more than 15 minutes, limiting fan fundraising to $50,000, barring ongoing series, and forbidding anyone who had worked on the official shows from touching fan work at all. A court rejected the production's fair use defense, and the case settled with the once feature-length film cut down to 2 short online chapters. One fan project had grown big enough to make an entire franchise formalize the leash, and every fan creator who came after inherited the tighter version because of it. Where the Star Wars fans had pushed and won, this one had pushed and been made an example of. The same ambition that wins a round can trigger a crackdown in the next, and the bigger the fan project, the more it looks like a threat instead of a tribute. Elsewhere though, the pushing kept working. Because fans revolted against a first look at the character, a studio delayed its Sonic the Hedgehog film and rebuilt the design from scratch, and the fixed version then opened to nearly $60 million and spawned a sequel that opened even bigger, the strongest launch a video game movie had ever seen at the time. Because a fan campaign refused to let a shelved version of a film disappear, gathering well over 100,000 signatures and running for years, a studio eventually spent tens of millions of dollars to finish and release the director's cut long after the theatrical version had come and gone. Fans have redrawn a character days before release and resurrected a film that had been left for dead and been proven right at the box office for it. The rescue director's cut, once treated as a fantasy the studio would never fund, arrived to warmer reviews than the version that had actually played in theaters, and become one of the most streamed titles on its platform that year. None of these campaigns had a studio's blessing when they started. Each of them was dismissed at first as noise, a small corner of the internet that would tire itself out, and each one outlasted that dismissal until the people in charge decided that giving in was cheaper than holding the line. None of this is new. The scale a single fan can now reach on his own is. Some of those studios rebuilt a character or funded a shelved cut when the audience pushed hard enough. One reached for its lawyers instead. But not a single one could ignore a fan project once it grew big enough to matter, and the company that owns Star Wars learned that earliest of all, which turns the last question back on Star Wars itself, and on a single rule the studio wrote years ago. The studio did not ban the film, it banned the film from earning a single dollar. That was the one hard condition on the whole project. It was allowed to exist, but every cost came out of the creator's own pocket with no crowdfunding and no way to profit. Taken at face value, that reads as ordinary brand protection, the same non-commercial rule the company applies to fan work across the board. Read against everything that followed, it looked like something else, because a rule against a fan project making money only makes sense if the project could otherwise compete for attention and revenue. The restriction itself starts to look like the company bracing for exactly this. That last step is a reading, not a stated motive. The condition is on the record. The worry behind it is the argument this video is making. The strain runs deeper than money. This film carries professional talent and a level of craft that resembles studio output, and that is precisely the profile that broke the peace at another franchise and ended in a lawsuit. The informal truce that lets fan films exist depends on them staying small and obviously amateur, and this one is neither. The line that once separated harmless tribute from a real production has thinned to almost nothing here. It has never been an entirely easy relationship either. This same creator once had a public falling out with a figure inside the official world over nothing more than an emotional reaction to a show. The goodwill curdled fast, and the apology that followed did not undo the reminder of how quickly it can go, which is part of why the studio's tolerance is now wearing thin. Whatever the intent, the result is plain. The most talked about Vader story of its moment came from one person working alone rather than the company that owns him, and the audience treated it as the real thing without waiting for anyone's permission. Once that happens, the line between fan film and canon-grade Star Wars stops being a wall the studio controls and becomes a line the audience draws wherever the quality earns it. The shift is permanent, and it began with a rule that turned out to be a door. The president now sits in the open for whoever comes next. Every creator with a hard drive, a plan, and enough patience has a working proof that studio-grade Star Wars can be made from the outside and embraced from the outside, without a single excessive signature. That puts a pressure on the company no lawsuit can answer, because it cannot be met with a cease and desist. The number climbing on that video earns its maker nothing, and that is exactly why it is the studio's problem now, because it measures a kind of belief a marketing budget cannot buy back. In the end, the studio's permission was never the barrier, it only ever looked like one. None of it happens without the character standing at the center of that fight scene. The Jedi Master who anchors it held the highest seat on the council, built the most dangerous lightsaber form ever practiced, and once had a Sith Lord's life at the end of his blade, only for a single blind spot to undo everything he'd built. So watch this video to find out.